So are you aware that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government were funding and propping up Hamas?
Say that again.
You lose track?
No, I didn't lose track.
I'm not sure what the funding apparatus means or is.
Shouldn't you look into this before we send billions of dollars over to Israel?
It was Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy for years to prop up Hamas.
A short history of Hamas is that the Mossad deliberately helped to facilitate their rise and even directly finance their rise in order to create a right-wing religious alternative to the PLO.
Specifically, because then there would be no negotiating a state for the Palestinians. Because no one in the international community is going to look at Hamas, this terrorist organization, and say, yeah, we recognize them. So the plan was to undermine the more secular Palestinian Authority types so that they wouldn't be in control, Hamas would be in control, and then no one would ever negotiate their state.
We have breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack within Israel's borders overnight.
The day after, on October 8th, there was a big piece in the Times of Israel about this. There was a front page of Haaretz. These are big newspapers in Israel. It's mind-boggling to me that this element gets left out of the conversation in America. It's not left out of the conversation in Israel. Like, their newspapers are all talking about this.
The United States stands united in the face of the horrific, barbaric attacks on our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel. The brutality is unlike anything we've seen in modern times. With misinformation and the horrible pro-Hamas demonstrations across the world, the U.S. Congress must reaffirm our unwavering support for Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel today and forever.
Quick question on Israel. Are you aware of the reports that prior to October 7th and over the years, Benjamin Netanyahu was actively funding and propping up Hamas?
I've not seen that report.
You've not seen that report? This is in Haaretz, Times of Israel. Very pro-Israel outlets have criticized him for this policy.
No, I haven't seen a credible report on that.
You have not?
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, you can find direct quotes from Benjamin Netanyahu saying this in his own words, saying that you must support Hamas. We must continue funding and supporting Hamas.
I want to read something to you. This quote: anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support the bolstering of Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. That was Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2019, supporting Hamas, because he knows that as long as Hamas remains there, he can always argue that there is no partner for peace.
You have women who were just living their lives in Israel. They were raped repeatedly, children taken out of their womb.
So now to argue for ceasefires or now to argue for the plight of the Palestinian people when the political group that they elected and keep in power fomented and executed a heinous terrorist attack? No, that's ridiculous.
Are you familiar with the reports that Benjamin Netanyahu over the years has been actively funding Hamas?
No, I'm not aware of the report. I do want to read the report.
This is in Haaretz, this is in Times of Israel, over there in Israel, pro-Israel papers.
I don't do hot takes. I want to read everything before I make a comment because something like that is a very key thing. I'm not sure what the funding apparatus means or is. Is it aid into Gaza? Is it direct aid to Hamas? I don't know.
He's directly quoted saying you just support Hamas to undermine a Palestinian state. This is in Haaretz.
But the thing is, I gotta read it.
Richard Sale in the UPI, Andrew Higgins in the Wall Street Journal.
I mean, this is widely reported. Like, shouldn't you look into this before we send billions of dollars over to Israel?
Well, tell me what the report says. And why don't we do this? Why don't we look into those and see?
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying. Is you got to look into it before the funding.
Yeah,
that would be prudent. But I'll tell you what he says. Haaretz quotes him saying explicitly that if you want to undermine a Palestinian state, you must actively support and fund Hamas. And this is well documented that the Israeli government has sent funds to Hamas leaders, covertly for years. But this is Haaretz quoting him in a private Likud meeting. Netanyahu saying it. Like I said, Haaretz, I'm sure you know, is widely respected.
Good point.
Is it factoring in?
I don't know if you have a question for me, but
shouldn't you look into this before we send billions of dollars over to Israel?
Well, tell me what the report says. Good point.
Is it factoring in?
I don't know if you have a question for me, but...
And then I have another quote from you. And the guy who said this is currently the finance minister. Okay, this guy is one of the top members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government from the religious Zionist party. He says the PA is a liability and Hamas is an asset. On the international playing field, in this game of the delegitimization, think about it for a second. The PA is a liability and Hamas is an asset. It's a terrorist organization. Nobody will recognize it. Nobody will give it status at the ICC, and nobody will let them push resolutions at the UN.
Shouldn't you have read that before sending $14 billion of American taxpayer money over there?
To support Israel, our greatest ally in the region,
Yes.
when they were attacked, we would always do that.
We
would always do that. Why wouldn't we support our allies?
Doesn't that factor into the equation if they were actively sending their money to Hamas?
Pause. Did Israel send $14 billion? Not likely. That's number one. Number two, you want to read these reports before we fully comment. All right?
You should read those before voting to send money.
In 2009, Avner Cohen, a former Israeli religious affairs official who worked in Gaza for over 20 years, told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation." Another former Israeli official, Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, said he was given a budget to help finance Islamist movements in Gaza to counter Yasser Arafat and his Fatah movement.
We have to teach our students. I mean, I saw protests at universities these last couple days where left-wingers are supporting Palestinian movements and Hamas. They just murdered 40 babies. They beheaded 40 babies.
The Palestinian people actually support this. You know, you hear these crazy comments from the squad about, the Palestinian people being caught in the crossfire. They support Hamas. The people themselves want a government, a terrorist government that actively creates weapons and not electrical grids or water treatment plants. That's the kind of situation you're in. So Israel has no choice here. Right now, Iran has denied any involvement. Hamas leadership has denied Iran's involvement. Now, what is also true is that by the very nature of funding and training this proxy force for decades, it's clearly Iran's fault. So whether Iran has direct involvement in this particular operation is another question, but Iran created Hamas. So they are one and the same effectively. Doesn't mean they always operate exactly in unison, but they are one and the same. But they've been funding and training them for decades.
All right, so Crenshaw, you got a second? Quick question on Israel. So are you aware that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government were funding and propping up Hamas with the gray zone? Are you familiar with that they were propping up Hamas and funding them prior to the October 7th?
That's a good point.
Does that factor into your,
decision to send weapons
Correct.
to Israel
Correct.
to defeat Hamas?
Yes, because if they are actively propping up Hamas as part of a policy, does that maybe they're not deserving to be bailed out?
Well, my support for Israel will be for the entire nation of Israel, not one person.
It's run by that one person.
Well,
And by the way, he's been in power longer than any Israeli prime minister ever. His choices are Israeli policy for a generation straight now.
Qatar and Turkey were sick and tired of Hamas's antics, and Netanyahu went over there and begged them. That was according to his own defense minister at the time.
That's who controls the money at the end of the day.
I'm not going to debate you on this, so if you want to listen to an answer, I'll give you an answer.
I'll listen.
Okay. And it's much more important than just the support for action against Hamas. This is a statement against Iran. It's a statement that will be received by Xi Jinping and the CCP. It's a statement that our country here, knowing what Christopher Wray told us, and I'm sure you are familiar with the hearing that we had last week, before we left for Thanksgiving, where he said that they're still looking for people that match the terror watch list. They're still actively looking for people inside the United States. So the support to, yes, defeat Hamas, but also the broader implications has to be considered. I appreciate the question.
Okay.
We have to support Israel, our friend and ally. One of the first things that we passed were a couple of resolutions in support of Israel and also condemning Iran-backed Hamas on the atrocities and the actions against our ally and friend Israel.
Excuse me, Congressman.
Hey, how are you?
You have a second?
Yeah, let me center this real quick. All right, what's up?
Quick question for you on Israel. Does it concern you that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government over the years were actively funding and propping up Hamas with the stated purpose of undermining a Palestinian state?
That was
What's that?
Say that again.
You lose track?
No, I didn't lose track. You're just...
Benjamin Netanyahu... This is
that was
reported
more of a
arrest.
statement. You're making a statement that question you want my opinion on.
Yes. Does that concern you? That's that fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has been actively funding Hamas and now we're funding him.
I'm not going to give you a comment on that.
Okay. So it doesn't concern you or just no comment?
Thank you.